There's the Chuck voice I listen to in bed every night.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 51 of the iPhreaks Show. This week on our panel we have Ben Sherman.
Hello from Houston.
Pete Hodgson.
Hello from pleasantly temperate San Francisco Bay Area.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. And this week we have a special guest, and that is Jim Rutherford.
Hi, Jim Rutherford from beautiful Nanaimo, British Columbia, Canada.
Ooh, we got a Canadian on. This is
Another
already
one.
going to be such a kinder and more maple
Friendly,
syrupy.
polite.
Yeah. We need some more maple leafs down here. Anyway, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. I'm a freelance iOS developer. Do projects for really anybody anywhere around the world who's looking for some iOS development help. And I've been doing development for many, many, many years. And it's the greatest job in the world and something I like to share with my son, which I believe is what we'll be talking about today.
Yeah, I'm a little curious. The topic actually says teaching kids iOS programming. Have you actually taught kids to write iOS apps?
You know, my son and I have sat down and we sort of worked our way through a couple of, fairly simple iOS apps. I haven't specifically taught him how to code in Objective-C. We've done a lot of projects that, use lots of different types of technologies. We've done a little bit of Flash. We've done a little bit of Scratch. We've done a little bit of Minecraft modding. But really the way we tend to do it is, he might come up with an idea and, we'll sit down together and come up with some ideas and take a look at how we might want to try to do that. He is a 10-year-old. So, from that standpoint, his attention span is not, it's not quite up where, you need to sort of be, spending 5, 6, 7 hours in front of the computer screen, cracking out code. So we try to break it down into small little chunks and produce something that's fun and that he can show his friends or we can just have fun with, spend time together, really.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have 5 kids, and I've tried one by one to try and get them all into programming. Not because they have to do what I want to do, but I feel like it's a good living, and it allows you to be creative and solve problems. And you looking at the landscape out there for the potential careers. I don't know. I think, I would just like them to have this opportunity. So far, they haven't been super interested in it, but I don't know. It's all about just exposing, the kids to the opportunities to learn and finding out what interests them, right?
Exactly. I think, there's so many opportunities for kids out there, whether they want to become a professional soccer player or a professional dancer or, who knows what they'll become interested in over their lifetime. But yeah, just really exposing them to the different sorts of things. And, what I know is programming. So, certainly that's, something I enjoy sharing with my son. And I know it's something he's very interested in as well. I mean, I think ever since he's been about 6 years old, he wants to be involved in game development. At one point, he wanted to be a game tester, which I thought, that's a pretty cool career. But who knows where he'll end up? Who he'll meet along the way, and what will inspire him. So, it's just I see it as a step on the journey towards a happy and productive career.
Yeah. Well, the other thing that I find interesting about teaching kids to program is that more and more fields out there are becoming computer dependent. And so even if they're not writing the code that does whatever it is that the industry needs, they're still going to need to use the computer, and that kind of familiarity really helps.
Yeah, I think, a fairly popular term that's bandied about quite a bit right now is digital literacy. And I think probably the best way I've seen it explained is, in schools, kids learn how to read and write. Now, not very many kids are going to end up writing, the next Pulitzer Prize winning novel, but they certainly need to be literate. They need to know how to read and write. And I think with digital literacy, it's a very similar thing. I think they need to learn how to read and write code. Whether or not they ever become a professional programmer is a different story, but certainly whether it's, creating a macro in, whatever word processor they'll be using in the future, or, customizing their work environment through some sort of scripting. I think that basic literacy can go a long way to, augmenting, the skills that they have in whatever career they choose.
Yeah. I mean, just learning how to type properly can go a long way to that. My kids can type like 100 words a minute on their iPhones, but when they get to a computer, it's considerably slower just because they don't spend as much time in front of the computer. as they do in front of their mobile devices, right? And considering that when they get into the workforce, likely a considerable portion of their career is going to be spent sitting in front of a computer, for all types of jobs. And I think, like you're saying, just general computer literacy is good, being able to whip things up in Excel just because, you're not afraid of it, or, being able to type quickly so you can get things done. I think definitely is really important. I think, taking a keyboarding class in middle school was hugely important for me, although mine was on a typewriter. But, it was definitely helpful for my career.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think keyboarding is a tremendously important skill. And, my son has been taking keyboarding, I believe, since he was in grade 4, whether I think it's like Mavis Speak and Tutor thing they have set up in the computer lab. And, he's a fantastic little touch type keyboarder.
So how do you get kids into programming? I mean, you talked about Squeak and some of the other things. What seems to be the thing that they latch onto the most?
Well, I can really only talk about my son. I've got one boy, and sort of what goes farthest with him is if we're working on something that he is personally invested in. And I think we probably all, like, for example, when I was learning Objective-C, I started by reading some books and whatever, but at the end of the day, for me to really learn it, I needed to build something that I wanted to use. So typically with my son, what we've done is, we've worked on little projects that sort of evolve around what he's interested in. So, a couple of years ago, he was totally obsessed with Minecraft. So, we did a couple of projects around Minecraft. We made a very simple little Minecraft mod. We downloaded Eclipse, sadly, and and a product called Minecraft Coder Pack, which is a package of Java files that make it really, really easy for you to create your own Minecraft mod. So it exposes pretty much everything in the game that can be customized. And, we created a very simple block. And we called it Rutherfordium. And, it's the hardest, most, incredible element in all of Minecraft. It never decays. So, once you have a sword of Rutherfordium, you're virtually invincible. And, it's just a very simple little mod. It probably took us about an hour. I don't have a lot of Java experience, but it was pretty simple to get this block set up. And, then you just sort of go through and, it's a really great environment because you can kind of talk about objects, so here's our block and it's represented by this, Rutherfordium.class file. And, you go and there's a constructor class, or there's a constructor method. And then you set a bunch of properties, and then you can go in and you can, set global properties in terms of, how deep you have to dig to gather that block, how rare it is. And then you load up Minecraft and you're in your world, modifying it. Also gave me an opportunity to show him a little bit of, I'm a big Fireworks fan, Adobe Fireworks fan, so I taught him using Fireworks. That's my tool of choice. But you certainly could have used Photoshop or really any other graphic program. And he went and he actually designed the block. Using pixel art. And then we had our own little Minecraft mod. And, it was a sort of a fun little, it was probably about 2 hours in total to get it going. And, just an opportunity for us to sit next to each other and me to explain a little bit of code, him to do a little bit of graphic design. And, then we had something that he was just tickled pink that he was able to use this with inside the Minecraft world.
One of the difficulties that I had, it's pretty easy to get young kids excited about games, right? Creating games, maybe putting artwork that they create in the game or whatever, or just saying, okay, tell me what kind of game you want to make and we'll try and make it together. And in doing that, what happened to me was that the feedback cycle was way too long. For instance, my son, when he was in elementary school, my oldest son, he wanted to do a planet project, and most of the kids would do like a paper mache planet and they'd paint it or whatever. We decided to do it in 3D on the computer, where you could just sort of like click and drag around. And my 3D is pretty rusty because I don't do it all the time. So this was in DirectX or Direct 3D. I did this, and I eventually got it working. Man, it was like a few hours of just head scratching work, and he was uninterested in that part of it. What really got him going was I had him open up, this was on Windows at the time, so he was using paint.net, and I just had him draw the texture of the planet. I think it was Saturn or something. I can't remember which planet it was, but I had him draw what the texture would look like, and then we wrapped it around the sphere. And he really liked that part of it. And when we showed it off in the class, using my laptop, the entire class eyes lit up and they're like, "Oh, that's so cool." But it's the slog in the middle, which can sometimes be the most rewarding part. That, like when you encounter a problem and you don't know how to solve it, and, eventually you tackle that. That's the high that I get off of programming. And that's the type of sense of accomplishment I want to sort of impart on the kids so that they can understand why I like it and why they might like it. But it also tends to be the biggest barrier. It doesn't look like any fun, right?
Yeah. And I think what you said there about problem solving is really important, because I think that's really, at the essence what we do is we're problem solvers. We take a problem, whether it comes from a client or a coworker or some product specification, and we solve that problem. So, I think it's maybe the most important skill that we can teach our kids, regardless of what they decide to do. At some level, as they get older, they will be solving problems. Maybe it will be with code, maybe it won't be with code, but that ability to sit down and say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Let's figure out. It's something my son and I were doing over the weekend as we were working on creating a World of Warcraft add-on. He's big into WoW right now. So we started writing a WoW plugin, and I just started off by saying, I have no idea what I'm doing. So let's sit down and figure out how to do this. And, his first question to me was, can we only do this for half an hour? And I'm like, yeah, that's totally cool. Let's see how far we can get in half an hour. And then we'll come back in a couple of days and we'll see how much farther we can get. We actually got quite a ways, but I think it's just sort of exposing them to that, here's how I solve this problem. This is what an event is. And here's all the events that we can respond to in WoW. And I showed him this great big long list of there's 1,000 events. And he was already starting to say, oh, so we could do this and we could do that and we could do this. I'm like, yeah, we can pretty much do anything. It's just a matter of sitting down and figuring out how to do it. So I think that's really important is the whole problem solving aspect. And I know they teach a lot of that in school right now. When they're doing a lot of their projects right now, math and social studies and sciences, it's already based on problem-based learning, which is, where the teachers give them a problem and the students sort of figure out a way to, how they would solve that. So I think there's a really good synergy there between what we do and, what they're doing in school.
What about, even younger kids? I know there's lots of sort of toolkit programming languages that are more visual that allow you to sort of drag control blocks and things like that. One of the ones that I remember learning on a long time ago was Logo, where you have the little turtle and you can tell them to move up 4 spaces, turn right.
Yeah.
That was pretty, I don't know, I guess pivotal for my own learning.
Did you do that on a typewriter too?
Yeah, I had to walk uphill to school both ways in the snow. Yeah. So that to me was I don't know, helpful to be able to think procedurally and to see the output. Do you have any experience or recommendations on tools we can use for kids even younger than 10 years old?
Yeah, certainly. One of my favorite projects is it's a project called Scratch. It's produced by MIT, and it's a drag and drop programming environment. It's a really, really, really great toolkit for kids. There's a whole online community around it. Very, very low entry barrier, but you can create interactive stories. You can create very simple games. You can create animations, and it's all done with a drag and drop interface. And you can drag and drop control structures like for loops and conditionals. You can integrate operators into it. And, you essentially can take a sprite and animate it across the screen by using just sort of drag and dropping these control blocks around the screen. It's recommended for kids 8 to 16. I think there's about 200,000 projects up on the Scratch website that, as a parent, you can actually show your child the project, and then you can there's a little button and you click it and it flips the project over and shows you the code that was used to generate it. Very, very interactive. You can go from 0 to hero in literally a couple of minutes by just dragging and dropping things around. It's something I have planned actually to go and teach at my son's school. I'm working with his teacher right now, trying to organize me coming in once a week and teaching them scratch. So looking forward to having a lot of fun with that. But certainly a really, really neat product.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I'm looking at the website right now. My son is 8, and so I keep thinking, is this something that he could just pick up and run with, or?
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of great little videos, and the videos that show you how to do things are very short. And literally, I mean, you can put a sprite on the screen, a little bit of, drag a couple of blocks onto the code editing workspace and have that sprite jumping within a minute. And at that point, really your imagination just becomes, your only limiting factor. So yeah, I would, if 8-year-old, I would definitely introduce him to it and, see what he ends up creating.
I'm assuming it runs on Windows, Linux, Mac.
Yeah, it's Flash. So, really any web browser that can run Flash is going to be able to handle it. And yeah, lots of fun.
That's really cool.
Do you know of any available for iPad? It might be a little bit easier for super young kids. I mean, my youngest are 4-year-olds, and they can navigate an iPad like crazy. But a computer, the sort of dexterity for mouse and keyboard isn't quite there yet.
Yeah. No, I haven't seen anything. I mean, nothing has caught my eye for kids that young on the iPad. I did come across an app a couple of days ago called Codia, which is similar to Scratch, except what you're actually writing code. And it uses Lua, and you can create interactive stories, simple games, interactive animations, that sort of thing. And the entire IDE is on the iPad. Haven't really dug into it too deeply, but it certainly looks quite interesting. Kids love iPads. They love iPhone. I mean, obviously, if you have kids, this, they just really love interacting with that. So I'm hoping it's something I can expose my son to and see what he can do with it.
I just came across one called Hopscotch, which is free and looks a lot like Scratch. You sort of drag control blocks onto a surface and then click play, and it can draw things or move things around. So that looks like something I might take a crack at with my kids and see if they're interested in it.
Yeah, I saw a tweet about Hopscotch the other day. I think they're looking for testers or something, or I'll see if I can dig that up and I'll pass it along for the show notes.
Yeah, all of this looks like a lot of fun. One thing that my 8-year-old is really into is Legos. And so I've been looking at the Lego Mindstorm stuff. And they also have a competition for elementary school and junior high or middle school aged kids. And so I thought that might be fun to get into too. Do you know much about that?
No, I haven't done any work with Mindstorms. My son loves Legos. Well, he used to love Legos. And at the time I thought about picking up some Mindstorms, but for whatever reason I didn't. There is an interesting project that I've only looked at, but it looks very, very cool. It's called Little Bits, and the web address is littlebits.cc, and it's kind of pluggable. It's kind of like a DIY building block set where you can build your own circuits, and it has sensors and, will detect light and it has servos, and you plug these things in different orders to create different circuits and different projects. And it's been something I've been considering dabbling into, sort of that whole create your own gadget kind of thing, and buy a bunch of blocks and start to put them together. There's also another interesting one which is targeted just for girls, and it's called Goldie Blocks. And it's a very similar idea, except it's based around a storybook, from what I understand. And it was designed by an engineering student from Stanford. And she wanted to try to come up with a way to inspire more women in technology. And she came up with this project for young girls where they follow the narrative in a storybook, and they have to build things to continue throughout the story. And again, I think another really interesting way to look at inspiring your kids to solve problems and using technology as the sort of the way that they get from point A to point B.
I feel like especially with younger kids, that connection to the real world maybe helps it be more engaging. Like they're not just moving stuff on a computer screen; they're like moving things around in the real world or seeing results in the real world.
Yeah, and one of the projects I did with my son was a project with the Philips Hue light bulbs, and the Philips Hue light bulbs are the light bulbs that you can control from your iDevice. And I created a UI on the iPad that essentially simulated the day-night cycle in Minecraft. And that day-night cycle in Minecraft would automatically adjust the lighting in the room to make the ambient light in the room, whatever the ambient light in Minecraft would be. And, we sat down and it was actually his idea when we first saw the Philips Hue light bulbs. And he thought, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could change the color of the light in the room to whatever it is in Minecraft? And for me, that was just a challenge. So yeah, we have to do this. So we went up and picked up the light bulbs and, made a very simple UI on the iPad. And it was neat in a couple of senses. Like you said, we were able to sort of combine the virtual world with the physical world. But he had some really neat ideas through the app. So originally, what I had the sun going up and down in just a straight line. So you would see the sun go up, and then the sun would go down, and the moon would go up, and the moon would go down. And he sort of came up with this idea: wouldn't it be neater if it sort of tracked across the sky, did a sunrise and sunset? So we sat down and ended up using a quadratic formula to create the arc that the sun and moon would move across. And, certainly the algebra was far beyond what his understanding of math was, but it was an opportunity to say, here's some math that, that people can use in the real world. And here's how we take that math and apply it across a UI. And, so hopefully when he's in junior high school or high school and he comes across having to learn some sort of odd, abstract mathematical formula, hopefully he'll be thinking about, how this formula would sort of come to use in the real world. I can remember when I was I think I was in honors algebra in grade 12, and we were learning some trigonometry thing, and a student asked why, and our instructor came up with the answer like, oh, one day you might want to build a house. And I think most of us kind of laughed at him because, we're in honors math. We're probably not going to be ever building houses. So it was really a poor example, but, hopefully when you can take those ideas and apply them to something that you're passionate about, you'll take a different point of view when you're being exposed to some of these concepts later on. So it was a real fun project. And, it was just really sitting down and being creative and solving some problems. And it was actually quite cool. It got picked up on Hacker News and made it to number 1 on Hacker News and then TechCrunch.
I remember taking a look at this video when that happened, and I showed it to my son. I was like, "Isn't this cool?" Because he dabbled in Minecraft a little bit, and he was like, "Yeah, that's cool." And I'm like, "Do you want to do it?" And he's like, "No." I'm like, "Okay." Well, I keep trying to find those moments to maybe build something like this. I've also been looking at a Raspberry Pi. I don't really know what I would do with it, to be honest, but I keep seeing these projects out there, and I'm like, this would be so cool to build with my middle son is really into sort of building things. So, just trying to find a good project to work on.
Yeah, I've been doing that with, my kid is 2 years old, so he's not really old enough to understand what's going on, but I've been playing.
Oh, baloney.
He understands, but he has a different interpretation of reality than grown-ups. But he loves it when I play with he calls them my flashing lights, which is me messing around with Arduinos and Raspberry Pis. And as soon as he sees me sit down at the table, he's like, "Are you going to make some flashing lights?" Yep.
I remember really my first exposure to computing, and it was through my dad. And, my dad was always, kind of a hacker. If our toaster broke, he'd fix the toaster. If we needed a new TV, he'd go to some insurance sale and find a TV that had been burned in a fire and he'd fix it. But one day he was a maintenance engineer at a lumber mill. And one day he went to a course and he brought back this programmable logic controller, this would have been about 1979, I guess. And, it was essentially a breadboard. And, what you could do is you could drop in some AND gates, some OR gates, some NOT gates. And this one had, an LED display that you could plug into the breadboard. And he showed me how we could make a counter. So how we could make this light go from 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way back up to 0 again, just by using these AND gates and a little switch. And, I was just hooked. I just thought that was the coolest thing in the world. And I think what was cool about it was it had a flashing light. There was some real world output that was just extraordinary to me. And, from that point onwards, I was hooked. And any chance I got to do anything, related to programming, I was there. So, I think just exposing them to these things, it's really important. I mean, if they catch, they catch. If they don't, they don't. Maybe it will be soccer or swimming or, or some, who knows, right? The kids they're just they're all different. That's very profound, I know.
They're all unique snowflakes.
Yes, that's better.
What's that line from Incredibles? Everybody's unique. That's the same as saying no one is.
I'm really surprised at how unimaginative I am. I think this the same thing as you, Ben, where like I know that my kid really loves it. Like when I do this stuff with flashing lights, but I can't actually figure out something called like I want to make him like a toy, but I actually have a really hard time thinking of something that he would find like engaging. And it's kind of funny because the stuff that I do that I don't think he'd be interested in, he finds like incredibly fascinating. But so that's my challenge, is trying to figure out something I can build him that he's going to be super excited by.
Yeah, and I think that's the cool thing about having kids is because, the kids are full of boundless imagination. They don't know limits. They'll say things like, hey, Dad, could you do this? Or, hey, Dad, can we do that? And I think at that point, it's for you to say, aha, I got him. How do I do that? And I think, as programmers, that's what we do. We, like I was saying earlier, we solve problems. So your kid is going to come to you with something and say, hey, do you think we can do this? Or do you think we can do that? Or how about if it did this? And that's where you sort of grab in and say, yeah, we can do that. And hopefully that will, well, I shouldn't say hopefully, maybe that will grab their attention, that will engage them, that will inspire them. And they'll want to do more, to learn more, to go out on their own.
One thing that kind of came to me while you were talking was that you mentioned the things like, the sun tracking across the sky and things, which was all mathematics that were a little bit beyond your son. And, I kept trying to rack my brain for projects that my son could complete front to back. And it occurs to me that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. That, we can sit down and, I can just plug in the magic, so to speak, for the pieces that he doesn't understand. And then he can figure out the other pieces that he does understand and still develop an interest in this stuff.
Yeah, one of my other things that I do with my son is I coach a soccer team. And, one of the conversations I have with the other parents of the team every year is that don't expect your child to play an adult's game. When we are playing soccer at 6 years old, we play modified soccer. We don't care if the kids throw the ball incorrectly. We don't call offside. There's only 3 kids on the field at the same time. We don't put them on a great big field that's, 100 yards by whatever, and put 11 players on each team and expect them to play an adult's game. And I think it's the same with really anything that you expose your kids to. They're kids. Like you were saying, they're not going to get all the mathematical concepts, and that's sort of where you've got to step in and help out. So it's sort of guiding them and giving them things to do that are within their, I don't even really want to say so much ability. It's you're sort of what's in their desires and help guide them to get there. So like I said, when we were doing the Minecraft mod, he would probably have been about 8 then. So certainly he's not going to become a Java programmer, but he was certainly more than capable of creating that Rutherfordian block. And, that was the part that he was able to say, when he had his friends or he'd say, I made that block. I put the little purple dots on because purple is my favorite color. So, I think it's really sort of keeping perspective. And, when they want to learn more and they ask to learn more, then you show them. And, hopefully they'll take that somewhere.
I'm really curious to see where I can go with this with my kids. And even if they wind up doing something else, when they're older, that's fine. But one thing I want to get into a little bit is specifically iOS programming for kids or younger people. At what age do you think they really kind of grasp what you're doing with iOS?
That's I haven't exposed my son much to iOS development at all, other than sort of him watching what I do. And maybe part of that's because I'm still, I'm still learning. I've been doing iOS development for about a year and a half now. I've done tons of Flash and Flex and Silverlight and WPF and, C#. But Objective-C was a language I had a little bit of a tough time. I wouldn't say tough time learning, but it was just conceptually a lot different than anything I had done before. And I think there's a lot of moving pieces for young kids. It's one of the things that really sort of draws me towards Lua and, taking a look at projects like Corona, at coronalabs.com, where, you can create, apps, cross-platform apps using the Lua programming language. And what's really nice about that is you can actually create apps where, all the code is really in one file. You're not dealing with lots of classes and, huge, deep frameworks. Typing and, header files, interfaces. I just find there's a lot of overhead with Objective-C that might make it cognitively hard conceptually for young people. That's not to say there's not, a 12, 13, 14-year-old who is doing some really amazing things with Objective-C. But for me, with sort of the way I think about Objective-C and where I think my son is, I just don't think it's very accessible. And, again, I'm not professing to be right about this, but that's just sort of my gut feeling. I know we tried to do we did a cookie clicker clone. It was sort of the cookie clicker fad was big a few months ago, and all my son's kids were playing this. It's this stupid little web game where you tap on a cookie and you get points and you challenge your friends, and whoever gets, I don't know. So we created a very simple clone, and my son asked a lot of questions, but I could see him really losing interest just in the overall complexity of it. So I don't think I'm at the point of actually teaching him that. But again, we were doing some Lua with the WoW programming on the weekend, and he was all over that. It seemed to, again, not a lot of cognitive overload to getting something going fairly quickly. And I think when dealing with kids, I think you need that quick win solution. Otherwise, you're going to lose them fairly quick.
Yeah, this kind of reminds me of that sort of age-old question, like, should you have a computer science background to be a professional programmer, right? Like, there's all this underlying stuff, which is important to know, but not critical. For a professional programmer, should you learn C before doing, C# or Java or something like that? And I generally lean on, yes, that's valuable to learn, but not required. And in the case of kids, they're never going to be interested enough to learn, like, what a pointer is and, like, why you have to nil terminate a string. I mean, that stuff is just, you might as well turn off all interest in programming immediately. So I think it's, starting at a high level where they get those quick wins is good, and they can sort of ignore all the nitty-gritty details underneath is probably really important. And because Objective-C, you squint and there's a lot of C in there.
Yeah, I think, what I would hope my kid would get out of some of the sessions we do are sort of, like you say, the higher level concepts. So, what's an operator? What's a variable? What's a conditional? What's an expression? Those are the things that I think if you have a really good high level understanding of, if you want to dig into some of the lower level languages or something a little bit more complex, hopefully by then, I think if they get to the point where they want to dig into some of the lower level concepts, they're going to be motivated to accomplish something, to do something. And it's at that point that I would certainly choose to dig in deeper and say, all right, well, here's what a header file is, and here why it's important, and this is an interface, and we have a public interface, a private interface, and in Objective-C we have to worry about the types of data going into our variables. So here's the way the type system works. But yeah, that's, again, there's a fair amount of cognitive overhead in there, which I think is why. I'm really,
you got to sell them on the benefit, right? So that that they're like, okay, I want to write a game, and I know that that's going to require some programming, and so I'm willing to invest some time to, maybe be uncomfortable and not really know what I'm doing and ask questions and get through that so that I can get to the end result. And I think, that's probably the best thing that we could teach our kids is, you can do this, and I'll provide you with whatever resources you want. To make that happen.
Yeah.
I think it kind of goes back to that soccer analogy. If you kind of want to make it fun and get them hooked, and then once they're tricked into thinking it's easy, then you do the bait and switch and start teaching them about reference counting and all that stuff.
One thing that strikes me, though, too, is like my 7-year-old is really into art. And so I keep thinking that maybe I could take some of her artwork and put it into a game or something.
Yeah, that was actually the very first project my son and I did. I think he was 4 and we were at a restaurant, and he asked if I could make a video game. I said, absolutely, I can make a video game. And I said, but you've got to draw all the artwork. So he flipped over his restaurant menu and he grabbed the orange crayon and he drew a tank and some helicopters, and we made a little game out of it. And it was tons of fun, for me. He was just, every time we'd have a friend over, they'd play this little game, which I don't even think it really worked properly. I don't think you could actually kill the last helicopter. But he played that for hours, and it was all his artwork. And actually, there was a game I came across yesterday called Flippy Unicorn. And
I stole my pick.
Oh, sorry. But, again, a very similar idea, very cool idea. And I'll let Ben talk about it in the picks. Dun, dun, dun.
Foreshadowing.
Yeah, I really like the idea. And I mean, she's drawing mostly stick figures at this point, but still.
Hey, any way you can engage them to do something, right? Again, whether it's programming or being a graphic designer or being a soccer player or a dancer or a scientist. I mean, if you take your kids skiing, maybe they'll become a professional ski instructor. Who knows, right? But it's just that whole, the whole thing I think about parenting is, taking whatever they're interested in that day and seeing if you can help expose them to it. And if it's a firefighter and the next week it's a doctor or a veterinarian, I mean, I think as a parent, there's lots of things you can do to expose them to that. And maybe something will stick. Maybe it won't. Maybe it'll be a fad. Who knows, right? Just really, try to find those things that engage them and support them in that.
Yeah. The other question I have is, are there any conferences out there that are kid friendly? The one I keep hearing about is Robots Conf that would be friendly, but I'm wondering if there are other more programming and less hardware focused ones.
There is one conference coming up this summer, I believe, and it's called iKidsConf. It's being organized by Saul Mora, Magical Panda. He does the core data magical record project, and Jamie Newberry, formerly of, I guess, Black Pixel, and she's now helped me. Her podcast is Unprofesh, and they're putting a conference together called iKidsConf, and it's being planned to be held in Disneyland, which is a great event or a great venue. And I believe it's coming up this summer. And they have a Twitter account is at iKidsConf. And I think they have a link to the registration page. That's really the only other one I've heard of in terms of sort of kids-related conferences.
I know that CodeMesh has like a kids kind of parallel conference. So if you go with your family, and that's like in a not an amusement park, what's the word? Like a water park. So a lot of folks, when I was there, a lot of folks kind of brought their families, and their families were either off playing around in the water park or were doing this kind of little parallel kids conference at the same time as the programming one, which was really nice, actually. It was really nice to see people walking around a conference with their kids rather than walking around not with their kids.
Mm-hmm. Another site that's quite interesting, if you'd like to sort of do more sort of DIY type projects with your kids, is there's a site called DIY.org, and they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of projects that are suitable for boys and girls of all ages, and they range from building things in Minecraft to doing things with makeup, creating survival kits and jewelry and recipes for baking, but they're all very accessible projects. And I think when you complete them, you actually get badges, virtual badges. And they have a little iPhone app that you can keep track of your badges and all the things that you do. But certainly if you're interested in doing projects with your kids and, doing things that are sort of DIY based and technology based, it's a great website. Lots of resources for parents and lots of projects for kids. Lots of fun there to be had.
Yeah, I love all this stuff. I'm going to be using the show notes to pull a bunch of stuff together. My kids' school have an after school program that parents can pull together, and it sounds a lot like what you're looking at doing at your kids' school. And so all of these things really are exciting to me. And the idea of iKidsConf, that sounds like fun too.
Hanging out at Disneyland for a few days, it's always fun. And if you can get some kids learning in there. And the interesting thing about the sessions at iKidsConf is the kids will attend a 45-minute session, and then there will be a 15-minute session for the parents afterwards. So the parents can get an idea for what the kids were learning and given some ideas as to sort of how they can support them and engage them when they get back home. Another project that I've seen and now I think it's quite big in the UK, and it's called Code Club. And it's sort of really follows the open source software, sort of community idea where, a bunch of volunteers come together and teach kids to code for free. And I'd like to hear if there's more organizations like that in North America, and sort of how the community could pull together to offer some of these digital literacy programs, for kids without sort of a high barrier to entry, like, having to go to a conference in Disneyland and spending thousands of dollars. Really code should be, and learning how to program should be, accessible and free. And it'd be nice to see more organizations like Code Club, or I know there's another organization, I think it's called Code Kata, essentially a place where you show up and learn how to learn digital literacy. So it'd be really great to see more programs like that pop up.
That's awesome. Looks like Code Club, they have a Code Club World, which is the worldwide organization for the UK. And it looks like they do have some in the US. I don't know if any of these are in Canada.
Yeah, it's been a while since I checked this site out.
No, it looks like they're, the furthest north or the closest to you would be in Seattle.
Yeah, their manifesto is very cool. And, it's definitely interesting taking a read and thinking about maybe how you could do something like that in your own community.
Really, really interesting. All right.
No, this is all really interesting stuff.
Well, then we'll go ahead and do the picks. Pete, you want to start us off?
Sure. So my first pick was inspired by us talking about keyboarding at the beginning of the show, and it reminded me of many joyful afternoons spent with Mavis Beacon touch typing, and then I found a few years after that there was a game called Typing of the Dead, which was it's basically
So
the same as it's the same as Mavis Beacon, except it's the arcade game, like whatever that arcade game was where you have to shoot the zombies, except you have to type the words before the zombies get to you. I tried to find it online and I kind of failed, but I found an almost exactly similar game called Typing of the Living Dead. So that's my first pick. Good way to engage your kids in learning to touch type, I guess. Although I'm not sure if you want to have your kids like shooting zombies over and over again. My next pick is kind of random. It's an organization called Black Girls Code. So these guys are, they're kind of their mission, their vision is to kind of help young women of color get into computer science and STEM and all that kind of stuff. I think they either use Alice or Scratch. I can't remember what. But they started off here in the Bay Area, and they've kind of been super duper successful and popular, and they're all over the US now, I think. So they're just a cool organization, and if they're in your area and you want to support them by being a mentor or being offering up space, then you should do that. And then my last pick is a beer. I feel slightly weird picking a high alcohol beer, given we've just been talking about kids, but I'm going to do it anyway. This week I am going to pick Dog Patch Sour from Almanac Beer Company, which is based in the Dog Patch area of San Francisco. I just found out about this brewery the other day. They're really cool, very kind of hipster, artisanal, local. Like they brew seasonally and they take like local fruit from the neighborhood and all that kind of stuff. But their beer is also really, really, really good. As good as Russian River sour beers, which if you know anything about sour beers in America, you would know that Russian River are really good. These guys were very, very, very good. So that's my last pick is Dog Patch Sour from Almanac.
Awesome. Ben, what are your picks?
Let's see. So my first pick was alluded to earlier. It's the Flippy Unicorn project by Walter Tyree. And basically his daughter drew all of the unicorns and the background in the app. And so he wrote this app with her, and it's 99 cents, and he's giving her all the profits. So I went ahead and bought that. The game is silly, but, maybe my kids will like it. But I want to support that type of thing. I think it's really awesome. And will probably be a memorable experience for his daughter. So my next pick is another sort of father-son project. This one was this guy created a weather balloon and attached a iPhone to it to record, and had GPS. And so he and his son launched a weather balloon. It actually went all the way up to the edge of space and then popped. And then they went and they had a parachute, and they went and found where it landed and was able to grab the video for that. So again, just one of these moments that this kid is going to remember forever. So I will link to those in the show notes. And then an anti-pick. I had pneumonia last 2 weeks, and it was terrible. So I actually was in San Francisco, and I met up with Pete and just tried to have a good lunch. It was not really happening, but at least I got to go say hi to Pete. So anyway, don't get pneumonia, stay healthy, and teach your kids to program. Very
cool. So I've got a couple of picks. We've talked about teaching kids to program on the Ruby Rogues podcast, and we've also talked about robots last week. I think it was last week or the week before on the JavaScript Jabber podcast. We talked a lot about kids on that too. So I'm going to recommend both of those episodes. Other than that, I don't really have anything that I want to pick. So I'll hand the microphone over to Jim. Jim, what are your picks?
All right. Well, my first pick is a book, and the book's title is Everything Bad is Good for You. And it's a very, very cool book. I read it about 8 years ago, and I think it's still very, very relevant. But it really will make you think twice about sort of that question when you have kids, which is how much screen time is too much screen time. And this book studies the evolution of media over the past, I guess, about 40 or 50 years, and takes a look at how, and what he tries to do is correlate the increase in complexity of narrative in television, books, and movies and video games to an overall increase in IQ over the same period of time. And it's a really, really interesting read. Highly recommend it. My second pick is an app, and I sort of talked about it a little bit earlier. The app is called Codia, and it's an app for the iPad that lets you make games, simulations, animations, all using the Lua programming language. It looks very, very neat. And if your kids have an iPad, this looks like a very accessible way for them to create some really interesting projects. My final pick is a beer, and if you ever happen to be up in the British Columbia, Canada regions of Vancouver or Victoria, there's a fantastic brewery called Driftwood Brewery, and they have an IPA called Fat Tug, and it's really, really hoppy. It's really tasty, and one of my favorite beers whenever I can get into a pub that has it on tap. Fantastic.
Very cool. All right. Well, I just want to thank you for coming again. It's been a terrific discussion, and I've got a ton of ideas for things I can do with my kids.
Awesome.
I also want to remind everybody that we are still doing the book club for the functional reactive programming. We had a little glitch, technical difficulties last time, so we are still going to read the book, and we are going to talk to Ash. It's just, it didn't happen last week, and we're still working that out. So besides that, thanks for coming. We'll catch you all next week. Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.